What's going on, guys? Happy Saturday. Thanks for checking out the channel again. We're going to go through a couple mailbags with Jason and Rusty, and we're going to see what they have to say about some hot button topics. Then I'll give my input, or vice versa. And let's start to get through this.
Garnett would have been a top 10 player of all time if he was actually drafted by a good team. His 2004 season is one of the best individual carry job all-around performances ever, and he is easily a top 5 defender ever who was elite at protecting the rim and switching on to guards. I agree with this wholeheartedly. I think Kevin Garnett is one of the 10 most talented players who's ever played this game. To be as skilled and as athletically freakish as Kevin Garnett was, as tall as he was, as fast, as long, as much of a vertical threat as he was, dude was a ridiculous athlete. He also had like absurd endurance, and like as you mentioned, his ability to switch on to guards, that was ahead of his time. In general, as a big man, a very perimeter-oriented game. Even from the post, like he's a fadeaway guy more than a hook shot guy, which for me is like the marker of if you're going to be like a big man, or like a finesse big man. Kevin Garnett's very much a finesse big man. One of the best playmaking bigs who ever played the game. Easily a top 5 ball handling big who ever played the game. The guy would routinely bring the ball up the court and was just had great handle. And in terms of a matchup, like for centers, he was too quick, and for power forwards, he was too big. So routinely, he always had a way to kill you. And he had a deadly mid-range jumper, man.
All right, so I think he was on point by saying he probably would be a top 10 player and that he's a top 10 talent. Kevin Garnett was a beast. He was awesome. Guys, Kevin Garnett was legit. But I think the biggest thing here, he said he was a finesse player. I would never describe Kevin Garnett as a finesse player. Guy played with intensity on both sides of the court. He was ferocious and he was intelligent, competitor. I can't imagine if he played besides like Kobe. But 100%, if he got drafted on to San Antonio and he was able to play there instead of Duncan, or if he got drafted on to the Lakers and paired up with Kobe or paired up with Shaq, or if he paired up with Dwayne Wade in his prime, he would 100% have won more championships. The guy was awesome. You could argue if he was on Dirk's level. I think he was better than Dirk. And then you could argue if he was on Tim Duncan's level. That's a tough one. Duncan's regarded as a top 5 player, top 10 player of all time, and the best at his position of all time. But if you watch them play and you reverse their careers, and Garnett was on the steady team with all the surrounded all-stars and talent and future Hall of Famers all around him, I think we might be having a different conversation.
The 90s suck argument is bullshit, but skill levels are now way higher for fringe and role players. Is this a hot take? I don't know. This is kind of my whole point in the video discussing the we're done with the 90s shtick. In general, yeah, I think you can appreciate the way that the era was at its time. And I think the top of the league guys, like the Michael Jordans and Hakeem Olajuwons or Charles Barkley's, like I think those guys would be top 10 players in today's NBA. However, the difference between the best player in the league and the 50th best player in the league is far wider of a gap in the 90s than it is now. And that's the real difference maker. Honestly, I don't think it's the talent at the top that's getting that ridiculous so much as the tiers below them just being way better than they were before, to the point where guys who used to be in the like fringe all-star tier are now like genuinely all-star quality, and the guys who are like never were gonna make an all-star team but pretty good are now like more like in a fringe all-star tier. Basically everybody's just gotten better in the lower and middle classes of the NBA. And I think that has a lot to do with skill development in the modern world versus what it was in the 90s. I think even more people want to be basketball players than ever did before. So there's just inherently going to be a higher standard of skill that's going to grow over time as more and more people want to play the game. It's very competitive, so naturally things are going to improve. That's kind of the nature of it, and I kind of hate how we have to sit here and either delegitimize older eras, or some players do, or some people do the opposite. I think it's all a beautiful ecosystem that I appreciate and enjoy as entertainment, and that's really what we should leave it at.
All right, there's nothing really he said there that I don't agree with. 100%, I think if you took the legends from the NBA, from any decade and any era, put them in any other era, they would still dominate. I don't care if you drop Jordan in the 60s or drop Jordan now, the guy would be probably the best in the league. There would be nobody better. You know, I don't care where you put Shaq, he's going to dominate. He's going to kill you. You know, and people are like, oh, he wouldn't be able to play nowadays. What do you mean? Nowadays, you would just get underneath. You can't double him. If you double it, I was going to kick it out to a wide open guy who's going to knock down a three. It's a different league. And then you're telling me like the guys from the 80s and 90s weren't as good because they don't have all these fancy moves. Well, if you're just taking the guy and his athleticism and his ability, you're going to tell me like in a guy like Isaiah Thomas isn't going to learn a hop step, or isn't going to learn a Euro step or a step back, or an in and out crossover where he's allowed to carry the ball a little more. The guy's going to pick it up in 2 seconds. Guys, my 8-year-old, my 11-year-old do these moves. All right, so you're going to take a legend from the game like Jordan and be like, oh, I can Euro step? Oh, shit. And guys, it would be like watching him levitate on a whole different level. Like, he's going to figure it out. So I agree with what Rusty said. The depth is way bigger nowadays. If you're doing like a top 20 talent under the age of 25, even like 10 years ago, you know, it was like a few guys. Now the list is like 75, 100 long. There's potential 2 or 3 all-stars on every single team. Given a little bit of patience, guys are breaking out and putting up numbers in a softer NBA, bigger numbers than they ever have. So you got point guards averaging 27 and 11. If they did that in the 90s, they'd have been the greatest player of all time. So things are changing, but the greatest will always be the greatest.
There is no MVP frontrunner. All 4 of the top candidates are more than capable of coming away with the award at the end of the year. If you have Giannis as your pick right now, that's completely fine. I do too. But to argue that any of them are running away with it while the others running away with it from the others is simply untrue at this point in the season. We'll have to wait until the last quarter of the season is over before we start crowning players the way so many people do. I mean, we usually do crown players at this point in the season. Like last year, we knew Joel Embiid was MVP at this point. Most years, by this stretch of the season, by the final quarter, we're almost certain who's going to win MVP. Or at the very least, we're almost certain of who 2, maybe 3 candidates are. You say there's 4 top candidates, there are 5 top candidates. I think Luka, Tatum, Giannis, Shea, and Jokic. Those are the top 5. I discussed this over on the main channel video that I just promoted, so if you want to hear further thoughts on the MVP, go there. But yeah, I do agree that this year there really is no clear-cut front runner. That's the reason why the MVP race is so interesting this year, is usually we have one of those by now. We very much do not, so we're kind of at a scramble of trying to figure out what the fuck is going to happen by the end of this year. And no one really knows. This is probably the first time I can say at this stretch in the season where I have little confidence in, I don't have that much confidence in what my MVP pick would be. Not my pick in terms of like who I would choose individually, but like who I think will win. I'm leaning Shea over Jokic by the slightest margin, and Shea and Jokic are not in a league of their own by any means in terms of this conversation. There are other guys that can get there. That's crazy. I really can't think of something like this since I've started covering this sport professionally. All-time.
All right, so we're going to unpack some of what he said. One, he said last year, by this time, we already knew who was going to win. That's wrong. I don't know if he doesn't remember last year, but last year was an extremely close 3-way with Giannis, Embiid, and Joker. And then a little bit after the All-Star game, Kendrick Perkins came out and called everybody racist and changed the voters' mind. And they didn't want to give Joker 3 in a row and said it would be historically not okay. And he wasn't that type of player. And if you gave him 3 MVPs in a row, you'd be saying historically he's one of the greatest of all time. And that's all BS, and they changed the narrative. And then down the stretch, it almost seemed like Joker got mad and he took his foot off the gas. He didn't really play like the last 3 weeks of the season. And Embiid ended up winning what should be a very questionable MVP award. He beat out Giannis, which I think Giannis had a better year. And almost like Joker gave it to him. But last year was extremely competitive. All right, now we're moving into this year where he said it's like 5 guys deep who could win. That's also not true. If you have the Celtics, yeah, they have the best record in the NBA by 7 games. But if you took Tatum off that team, they could literally almost have the same record. And then if you replace Tatum with Steph, Giannis, Shea, or Joker, it wouldn't even be fair. All right, the Celtics would be the guaranteed favorite. So if you think about it that way, with that much firepower around him, there's no way Tatum should win. He just shouldn't win. I think since the All-Star break, I think Jaylen Brown's averaging 29 points. All right, and that's not even including anyone else in that team. They're stacked. All right, Milwaukee, Giannis has missed a ton of games, and they only have 45 wins. So you got to get rid of Giannis. He's not in it. Nobody else in the East has over 45 wins. So forget about that because you need to be a high-winning team. So then you're going to go to the West. And you got OKC with an unbelievable record. No one thought they would have the number 1 record in the West this late in the year. But, once again, if you swap Shea and the Joker, when the Joker's leading all advanced stats, all right, all of them. You go check out advanced stats, he's leading all of them. And he has almost all the advanced stats highs for the last 4-year run. The guy's on an incredible 4-year run. But, who else is going to be MVP? Luka down here with 41 wins, never going to happen. All right. So Ant-Man potentially if he went bonkers for these final 12 games and they won all 12 and they took over the number 1 seed, maybe Ant-Man would have some type of put. But really looking at a 2-man race with the Joker and Denver. All right. I mean, OKC with Shea and the Joker. All right, and when you really get into it, it's not that close. It's really not. The Joker, by far, is having a better season. All right, let's look at stats. Now, the stats tell you the whole thing. If you look at who's a better defensive player, I'm going to say the Joker's a better defensive player. Look at rebounds per game. Joker's 4th in the NBA. You look at assists per game. Joker's 4th in the NBA. And then you're going to go to points per game. Shea is 2nd at 30, but right here, just outside the top 10, is the Joker at 26. So the dude's 13th in points, 4th in rebounds, 4th in assists. Guys, Joker's your MVP.
Rankings, GOAT debates, and comparing players from different eras is dumb. It's a fun thing to do casually, but the amount of focus that it gets from NBA fans has never made sense to me. It's hard to compare players from completely different eras, and is why people rarely have discussions about the best MLB players of all time. Well, I can't necessarily speak to what conversations are like amongst other sports leagues. What I have been told from other sports fans is that this is very much the case, that there's a weird obsession with eras and legacy in the NBA. I will make this point why it makes sense most that it would happen to basketball. I do think is that it's the easiest sport to watch casually, so that makes it easier to then apply narratives on top of that, because so long as you have a baseline understanding of the game, you can then do the narrative side of things, where that's not as easy in other sports. The other thing that's worth mentioning is, I'm not saying there's not evolution in other sports. There absolutely is. But there's really no sport that has the high degree of evolution, the degree of evolution that the NBA has, that basketball has. It's just, there's really nothing that's too comparable. I know in football, receivers are becoming more and more common, passing over rushing more than what we used to do in the past. Offense is mattering a little more than defense, which was historically not the case. This is me speaking as a layman, by the way. I don't know much about football. This is just what I have heard. So there's evolution in all sports. But because there is such a massive contrast between what 90s basketball looks like versus 2020s basketball, leads credence to delegitimization both ways, where people think this version of the game is superior, people think this version of the game is superior, and ultimately where you land on that end of the spectrum results in you arguing in whatever way. And yeah, I agree, it's kind of dumb. The worst arguments, the most poorly thought out, unresearched, garbage takes you will hear are ones with someone who is clearly ignorant to an era of the NBA when they're comparing them, whether that be a young fan who's talking about the 90s or an old fan who's talking about now. They are going to just be intellectually dishonest and say some complete horse shit. So yeah, I really hate how much it dominates the discourse, as you mentioned. It's, as you say, it's fine to have this conversation casually. I think it's enjoyable when it's a casual conversation and people aren't yelling at each other. I don't know, NBA fans don't seem to know how to do that. We can't.
All right, I'll keep this one simple. Sounds like he doesn't listen to a lot or pay attention to a lot of other sports. We do have a GOAT debate. People who pay attention to other sports, we do. Football, Tom Brady. Took him years to overtake Joe Montana. He just did. No one wanted to give it to him. I can remember Tom Brady having 4 Super Bowls, 5 Super Bowls. People are still talking about Aaron Rodgers, which is ridiculous. Kind of like how Kobe has 5 rings. People are trying to talk about LeBron when he had no rings. Now people are trying to talk KD into that conversation. It's just ridiculous. Main reason, to sum it up, I think basketball gets the most GOAT talk. It's a 5-on-5 sport. And with 5-on-5, it's the easiest to dominate your sport. And with the least amount of argument that it's a team game. Soccer 11-on-11, baseball 9-on-9 plus 2 sides of the ball. Football 11-on-11 plus special teams, offense and defense. So basketball, hockey, Gretzky is the great. Why is he the best of all time, the GOAT? Because it's 5-on-5. I can literally see who dominated. I'm right there for basketball. Jordan, Kobe, then the argument.
Evaluate Jimmy Butler by how he plays in the regular season because he realized that we only care about championships, so only shows his true skills in the playoffs. It's like saying Luka sucks, look at his all-star game stats. Oh, okay. I agree and disagree. I think if you're going to completely take off the regular season to the degree that Jimmy Butler does, it's your fucking fault if you get underrated, especially historically. That was your doing. Okay, he chose to play that way, so he's going to get ranked lower on people's lists inherently. That's just the nature of this thing. You have to put a buffer whenever you rank Jimmy because, like, if I was looking at just counting stats and his overall performance this year, Jimmy Butler's not been a top 25 player in the NBA this season, probably. He'll definitely be, I'm more likely than not, top 25 overall by the time the playoffs are done. I put him in my top 20 because Jimmy Butler is Jimmy Butler. And we know what he can do in the postseason. That said, I also think we're overblowing the postseason thing a little bit. After that Bucks series, which admittingly, holy shit, that Bucks series. But after the Bucks series, wasn't all that great. Injuries was a factor in that. And we've seen him be great on a finals run before this. I don't know. I think there's a balance to be struck. It's a difficult position to be put in for sure. And really how you rank Jimmy entirely is dependent on how much you value the playoffs over the regular season. I think all of us value the playoffs over the regular season, but there's a degree to it, and I don't think the regular season just fully doesn't matter as it feels like Jimmy Butler treats it. So yeah, part of that, a lot of that is on him.
I don't think there's a lot to add there. Jimmy Butler has been great in the playoffs, obviously. Playoff Jimmy. Last year, you started on full display. Giannis got hurt, and Jimmy was feeling it. He saw Drew Holiday, that couldn't stay in front of him, and it was too small. He played bully ball. He got whatever he wanted, and he got hot. And kind of built a legacy last year within one series. Like Rusty said, outside of that, the rest of the playoffs, he was very meh. I thought myself a lot like, this is playoff Jimmy, watching multiple of his games, not taking shots, not being aggressive, poor decisions. Playoff Jimmy's real. Last year, he took it to an extreme level during the Milwaukee series. but I want a guy who gives it to you every single night for 82 games and then brings it in the playoffs.
If the Celtics disappoint in the postseason, people need to hold Tatum and Brown accountable and change their perception on them as a championship-winning duo. This duo has been running it back again and again for years. I think it would be time for some major changes to the core of Boston. Here's the thing about that. I don't think it's a duo anymore. I only think you're really a duo when you're the clear two best players on your team, like the clear two best players on your team. And even if Jaylen Brown is the best player of everybody who's not Jason Tatum, I don't think he is, but even if he is, I think we can all agree it's not by some gigantic margin. Derek White and Kristaps Porzingis both bring significant contribution to this team regularly that is comparable to Jaylen Brown on any given night. Because of that, I really think this is just, superstar Jason Tatum and then star, which is a pretty fucking ridiculous situation to be in, mind you. I think if they make the finals, they won't really count as that disappointing because a lot of people think Denver would beat them. But if they lose in the East, then yeah, I do think some conversations will be had. I will say fully, I will go mask off on Jason Tatum if he just sucks in a wrong time at the playoffs.
All right, I got to go off here a little bit. I don't like this take. Since the All-Star break, Jaylen Brown's averaging over 29 points. Guy's been unbelievable. He gives you as good an effort on defense as any other guard in the NBA, or if you're going to put him at a shooting guard, small forward, whatever position you're going to plug him at. He said that he wasn't clear-cut the second best player. That's just not true. All three of the other guys on the Celtics team are awesome. All right, White, Porzingis, and Holiday are all awesome. I'm from Boston. I'm a Boston guy. I watch the games. I watch the highlights. Brown is awesome. All right, he is underrated. This is a bad take. Rusty, go watch some highlights. Celtics better win it. They're going to get about 65 wins. 15 out of the 20 teams, I think, with at least 65 wins have won the championship. So, Boston, you better get it done.
Their teams are equally good. The next rivalry will not be Wemby versus Chet, but Ant-Man versus Doncic due to marketability. I guess if we're debating biggest, I think both of them can be pretty big rivalries. I think the problem with both of these rivalries, though, is that even if I'm projecting the future versions of them, one player in this rivalry is just too much better than the other one for it to be like a real rivalry. Like Wemby versus Chet, we're talking about like Jordan versus Clyde Drexler, Doncic versus Ant-Man, same thing. Like it's not an all-time great type of thing. This is like LeBron versus Carmelo Anthony. Like, very clear who the best player is by a wide margin. There might be some, fun back and forth between them, but I think there needs to be a closer ability of their skill sets to be a great rivalry. I think the NBA's next great rivalry is going to be Wemby versus Jokic, because I don't think Denver is going away anytime soon. And I think Wemby is going to be contending for championships much sooner rather than later. So I think there's going to be a couple of times where those two clash in the playoffs, and that is going to be some generational, entertaining basketball. It's going to be good. I also don't know why Luka is more marketable than Wemby. Chet kind of looks like Abraham Lincoln, so I can see why that wouldn't work. But Ant-Man's very marketable. We all agree on that. Either way, I think Wemby versus Jokic is the future rivalry. I understand there's a decent age discrepancy, but I think we can get an easy 5-year overlap of them both being at their absolute peak and it being...
Wemby Jokic? What? It's obviously Wemby Chet. All right, they're rookies in the same year, playing the same position, plus Wemby clearly doesn't like Chet. And that's not even close. That just blew my mind that I even heard that. What? Like, it's so obviously Wemby Chet. And if Joker had a rival in the NBA, it would be Giannis. And number one would be Embiid. Him and Embiid going back and forth with the MVPs 4 straight years. Embiid verbally complaining that he thought he was more deserving of the MVP. So if Joker had a current rival, it would be Embiid. Then we get into Luka. Like, Luka very publicly dislikes Phoenix and Devin Booker. So It's Luka. Luka and Devin Booker. That's the rival going forward. They play the same position. They're in the same conference. They don't like each other. They already have a beef. I was going to give Ant-Man a rival. I would give it to SGA. They're close enough in age, play the same position, and they're both incredible. And then you got LeBron and you got Steph, who have played each other in the finals more than anybody else in the last 40 years. So that's kind of where I see the rivals. I didn't really agree on what Rusty had to say.
How good they are. For example, Murray and Butler, when it matters, are top 15 in the league. Tatum and Embiid, however, move from top 5 to fringe top 15. And there's a reply to this that Rudy wants me to read, apparently. For real, like people be putting LeBron in 15th during the regular season. Tell me with a straight face there are 15 players you would want more than a healthy LeBron in the playoffs. There aren't 15, but there's probably 10. I think I had LeBron at like 13, so that's pretty reasonable, but whatever. This is back to the Jimmy Butler thing. It's kind of hard to say. Really, I think we could just create different lists for different contexts. Like, here's the top regular season players, here's the best playoff players, or whatever. I don't know. I also don't know if Jamal Murray reaches quite top 15 in the playoffs. Quite. Jimmy Butler barely gets in there, and I don't think Jamal Murray's quite as good as Jimmy Butler in the playoffs. Shots taken.
This is a tough one. I don't necessarily disagree with his take. He's right. There's a different list for playoff players and regular season players. Is LeBron top 15? I don't know. There's a lot of guys that we haven't had a chance to see make playoff stretches just because they're not on winning teams. LeBron takes a lot of plays off, takes a lot of threes, doesn't play much defense, floats a lot on defense, and lets Anthony Davis, a top 5 defensive player in the NBA, try to do all his dirty work under the basket. And so I don't know. I think there's probably at this point about 25 players I'd rather have than LeBron. Just gonna give you energy on both sides of the court. He's still awesome. I don't think that's necessarily a diss. The dude's 40.
After the buzzer should be counted if the player was already in the shooting motion, such as a shooting foul, many legendary half-court shots, and clutch shots are worthless because the player still had the ball in their hands for a few thousandth of a second. No, hard disagree.
That's something I've always believed. I think that if you're going up at 0.0 from beyond half court,
well, you've always believed the wrong thing.
Yeah, I'm right there with Rusty, 100%. I thought about it for less than a second, and then my brain was like, nope, don't like it, hate it. Sorry, Rudy. I'm with Rusty.
As much as I love the Clippers, they are currently looking like a second-round exit after how they've been playing post-All-Star break. They've also been struggling a lot against teams with good bigs. I'm not as high on the Clippers as I was a couple of weeks ago. They have been slipping a little bit, but I ultimately still have pretty high confidence in them. The big man thing is interesting. The way that the Clippers win that is just that, yes, they're conceding how a big would play against them, but no team in the league has a better set of guards and wings than the Clippers do. So for that reason, it's look, they'll win the big battle, we'll win the guard and wings battle, and we'll see which position ultimately impacts the game more. It's definitely an area that could be a weakness. Zubac is a fine defender, but he's not a great one. Not to mention the way that he can get exploited by guards in the playoffs, as Luka just absolutely destroys Zubac every time they face in the playoffs. But I still think they're gonna be good. Second round exit, maybe.
Yeah, I'm right there. It looked for a little bit, a month maybe, the Clippers were legit. Over the last 20 games, I think they're 10-10. Harden's right back to looking like Harden at certain times, and leaves you shaking your head sometimes with the plays he makes. This team will go as far as Kawhi carries them. Back when Kawhi was on Toronto, that was probably the best flashes of any NBA player since Jordan and Kobe were in their prime. Just go back and watch right when he's healthy. Just watch him take over those games. The guy's unbelievable. Say hi.
fine. The Suns and the Timberwolves are not contenders. I think their specific weaknesses, which every team can anticipate and scheme for in the playoffs, are just too much for me to see them in the finals realistically. I agree with the Suns one. I think the Timberwolves are a fringe contender where I would ultimately label them as a contender, but they are a lower tier contender for sure. It depends entirely on Anthony Edwards and his performance, I think. That said, I think people way overrate how much you can scheme against Rudy Gobert or Karl Anthony Towns, but especially Rudy Gobert. I think that is probably what you're referring to, and that's just overblown. In particular, because the reason that scheme always worked when Rudy was in Utah was because there were no point of attack defenders on the Jazz. Meanwhile, the Minnesota Timberwolves have Jaden McDaniels, they have Nickeil Alexander-Walker, they have Kyle Anderson. There's someone else I'm probably blanking on, but they have good. Anthony Edwards is also a really strong defender this year. So they have good-ass perimeter defenders. It's not going to work the same, man. It's just not. The Timberwolves defense will hold in the playoffs. I'm very confident in that. The reason that I would label them non-contenders isn't for how you scheme against them, but just because their offense is meh. Pat Riley.
I think that's a good take. I think basically in the West you got Denver, and then you got a whole bunch of fringe contenders. I don't necessarily think Phoenix is any better of a chance than Golden State or the Lakers, Clippers. I think they all have about the same amount of chance. OKC, I think they all have something that is a question mark, whether it be they're unproven or maybe their best players past their prime. One or the other. Denver's the only clear-cut favorite. Then there's everybody else.
Is the greatest basketball mind of all time, and it isn't close. The man has been to an NBA Finals every decade he's been involved in NBA basketball, be it as a player, coach, or executive. The ability to adapt to every new era of basketball and stay elite is fucking insane. I do agree, yeah, he's had his, I don't know about the greatest basketball mind, but just in terms of Pat Riley being great. I mean, I'm a Pat Riley stan. Okay, I appreciate that guy. It's because of winning time, I'll be honest. I'm a sucker for a well-done production, and I think that Adrian Brody as Pat Riley in that show is just chef's kiss. Yeah, Pat Riley is really an interesting career. Was a mid player, decent enough to have a long enough NBA career, but like ultimately no more than like a 20-minute per game guy. Kind of just fell into being a coach of the Showtime Lakers. Like, look into the circumstances of how that guy got his coaching job, because it's fucking insane. And then from there, like, accidentally lead his way into being one of the greatest coaches of all time, won multiple championships with the Showtime Lakers. He ended up making the finals, I think, twice with the New York Knicks, and then won again as a coach in 2006 with the Miami Heat, and then has since won rings as an executive, bringing LeBron and Chris Bosh to Miami. Now he's also brought in Jimmy Butler, and that's made the finals in the 2020s. So yeah, he's had a direct hand in a finals team since the 1960s. That's not a lot of other people that you can say have that. They either don't live that long or they were there even earlier than that.
Yeah, I love Pat Riley. I think the guy's awesome. You can just tell by Miami's culture. The culture is about winning, no nonsense, hard work. Unfortunately, they haven't really been able to get many superstars there, but they're always competitive. Other than that, I think they need to get they need to find a way to recruit a superstar. I think it's been since LeBron James went that we've really seen somebody that's on a different level go there. Other great minds in the NBA that just come to mind: Phil Jackson, Steve Kerr, Jerry West.
Jokic is the most dominant player ever. He has no offensive weakness like other dominant bigs, and while he may not be the best defender, his ability to control what lineups coaches can have out there while he's playing makes up for that. That's an interesting perspective. If your metric for dominance is purely just being unstoppable, I think there's a case here. I don't know if I agree 100%, but, you know, like Shaq, yeah, Shaq can fucking bully the hell out of you and just push you out of the way and put your ass in the basket. But Jokic will make any floater you give him. He'll make almost every mid-range shot you get him. He'll not miss at the basket ever. And if you have any hope of making him miss these shots, you have to double him, or he will always make the pass to an open man. There aren't good options with Jokic. There are slightly better options than others, and that's as good as it's going to get. The rest of it, it depends if Jokic wants to cook you or not. Maybe you're lucky and you get a night where his shot is off, but if you're getting a standard Jokic day, there's really nothing you can fucking do to stop him. You're just going to have to pray to beat them in the margins, beat them on offense. But in terms of just stopping the dude from scoring the ball, holy shit, there's nothing you can do. That said, dominance isn't just one end of the floor. If you want to say the most offensively dominant player ever, I think I'd say that. But there are players that are dominant on both ends of the floor, and I think they're just going to have to get a little bit more of an edge there in that particular department. Not necessarily even making them better players, but more imposing ones. Well, that was hot.
Joker's a tricky subject. He's kind of nothing like we've ever seen before. He gives you the dominance of Shaq, the passing, of Magic, shooting touch of like Luka. And he's big. He's a 7-footer with size. So I think he's the best that the NBA's seen in a long time. He does this for another year or two, and he's going to be another championship, and he's going to be a top 5 player of all time. Guy's on an unbelievable stretch. You can define dominance in your own way. He's one of the best players I've ever seen in my life. I'm going to finish this off with a little clip from Jimmy High Roller because he's the best on YouTube that I've seen, and he kind of sums it up nicely. You guys, thanks for watching. Rusty, thanks for the content. I always appreciate it, and I always look for more. You guys, let me know in the comments what you think. You side Dan, side Rusty, or do you have your own opinion? I would love to know. Thank you so much. Click the like button, click subscribe. Have an awesome fucking weekend.
The magnitude of this skill set is emphasized enough. Shaquille O'Neal holds the title as the most dominant player of all time. He couldn't hit a free throw, he wasn't the type to survey the floor for open teammates, but none of that mattered because there wasn't a soul on earth that could guard him. But what if Shaq could knock down his free throws? What if he was one of the greatest playmakers of all time? What if he could hit threes? He'd probably have been the greatest player to ever touch a basketball, right? Well, in the 2000 playoffs, Shaq had the greatest postseason run of his career, averaging nearly 31 points, 15 rebounds, and 3 assists on 57% shooting. This was his masterpiece. Now take a look at Jokic's numbers from this postseason. Shaq was one of a kind because he was so unstoppable that he didn't need any variance in his game. But right now, Nikola Jokic is dominating the game like a prime Shaquille O'Neal, while shooting 47% from 3, while hitting 80% of his free throws, while orchestrating the offense nearly every single possession. Jokic is becoming one of the most lethal offensive weapons the game has ever seen. And he's doing it in a way that only he could. Among the greatest offensive players of all time, here's a chart of their best playoff runs in terms of points generated. That's points a player created through both scoring and assists. 30 is the threshold here, but most all-time greats surpass that total. KG, Barkley, and Carmelo all had playoff runs where they generated about 35 points a game. Dwayne Wade is the first player on this list to crack 40 points generated per game in a playoff run. Giannis, Kareem, and Steph all had runs averaging about 42 points generated per game. Keep climbing and you'll find the 9 players who surpassed the coveted 45 mark, and only 6 of them did it in the modern NBA. Allen Iverson's best playoff run that came in 2001, Luka in 2022, Jordan in 1990, Magic in 1986, LeBron in 2018, and Nikola Jokic this season, creating more offense than any player in any season ever.